sleep, where deep sleep embraces you. You turn over and over, drifting in and out of consciousness, having strange, nightmarish thoughts during your micro-sleeps. The day was oppressively hot and humid, so you left the window cracked to get a breeze, and now the curtains seemed to expand and contract. Turn over and over, drifting in and out of consciousness, having strange, nightmarish thoughts during your micro-sleeps. The day was oppressively hot and humid, so you left the window cracked to get a breeze, and now the curtains seem to expand and contract, like lungs filling with air. It's kind of relaxing to watch, until you see something. Were those eyes peeking through the curtains? Your heart begins to race. Is this the creep you heard rumors about? The deranged serial killer known as Jeff the Killer that's still on the loose? No, you must have been dreaming. You rub your eyes and take another look. Squinting through the dark, you see a ghoulish, monstrous face looking straight at you as he slowly pulls himself through your open window. In the morning, your bed will be empty. In the weeks to come, you'll be just another statistic, another missing kid. One of thousands of young folks that go missing in the USA each year. In time, your family will give up hope of ever seeing you again. You've become one of the 115 children that year whose disappearance has been officially recorded as stranger abduction. It's true that every year scores of young people just vanish into thin air. Sometimes they go out and don't come home. Sometimes they're at the shopping mall with their parents and just disappear, never to be seen again. Sometimes they're snatched from their beds during the night. There are real-life boogeymen out there. Maniacs on the loose, skulking around quiet neighborhoods. So, who is Jeff the Killer? Is he responsible for those unexplained abductions? Is he even real? Moving to a new place in your teens isn't much fun at all. You make friends, and then you have to abandon them. But for Jeff and his brother Lou, the move wasn't so difficult to accept. The new house was fancy, to say the least, and the neighborhood didn't look too bad either. No sooner than Jeff, Lou, and their parents got their new house in order, the nosy neighbors came around to say hello and check out who they'd be loving or hating in the next year or so. To break the ice, one of the neighbors invited the family to a birthday party. The neighbor Barbara explained that her son Billy was about to have a birthday party. Jeff's mom Margaret said her husband Peter as well as the kids would love to go. At this point, Jeff and Lou were in the background listening, both of them feeling kind of peeved that their parents had agreed on their behalf to go to the party of some kid they didn't even know. Young Jeff had always had a problem with authority. He was quick to tell his mom that she shouldn't do stuff like that. He stormed off in a huff, retreating to his bedroom where he threw himself down on his bed and skull. In that moment of teenage angst, he felt something really strange inside him, like his very own pair of anguish, an acute pain in his stomach. He felt hypnotized by his own anger. How dare she do that, he thought. He then came out of his enraged trance, not really knowing what had come over him. The same thing happened again the next morning as he was hastily eating a bowl of multigrain peanut butter Cheerios with something in his stomach, this time a grinding pain. And there was that feeling of rage again. He didn't know if he liked it or not. Maybe it was just moving stress, anxiety about going to a new school, meeting new kids. Some of them were bound to be jerks, that was for sure. He realized he was gripping his spoon so hard his knuckles were white. He was trembling with anger. But Jeff's anxieties were justified that morning at the school bus stop. Some wise-ass kid did an ollie on the skateboard right over Jeff and Lou's legs. Had he messed that up, he could have snapped one of their legs like a twig. Jeff didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of an end. The skateboarder was soon joined by two other kids, and in true Stephen King fashion, there was one cool kid, the skateboarder, whose name was Randy, a nerdy-looking kid named Keith, and an obese kid whose name was Troy. These kids would become Jeff's mortal enemies, his bêtes noires. In literal French, that means black beasts. Well, look what's been dragged into the neighborhood, said Randy. A couple of new freaks to kick around for a while. The fat kid guffawed, and the skinny-looking nerdy kid just stood there motionless. Randy explained to Jeff and Lou that as new kids on the block, there was a tax to pay, calling it a bus fare, and intimidatingly, he got right up in Lou's face. Lou stood his ground, pushing Randy back, but in a moment of outlandish anger, the fat kid whipped out a knife. Randy turned to his two bootlicker friends and said, well, it looks like these two kids are going to have to learn the hard way. The fat kid wielded the knife right in front of Lou's face and proceeded to rifle through Lou's pockets. He then passed a wallet to Randy. All the time, Lou was thinking how inconceivable it was for three kids in a wealthy and quiet suburban American neighborhood to mug him and his brother on their way to school. Jeff just sat there, boiling, raging, on the verge of exploding. That devilish feeling again filled his guts. He felt possessed with anger, and he finally stood up and growled at Randy. You give that wallet back to my bro, or I'll knock the teeth right out of your friggin' head. Jeff was seething, and before Randy could respond physically or come up with a smart retort, he punched Randy square in the nose, shattering it like porcelain. Lou hadn't seen Jeff do that before, but he was even more surprised when his younger brother grabbed Randy's finger and snapped it. Jeff took Randy's knife, but soon skinny Keith and portly Troy were on his back. Lightweight Keith took a stabbing for the team and went down like a sack of bricks. Jeff pushed Troy off him and hit him so hard in the stomach that Troy threw up as he crawled on the floor. The scene was a massacre. Lou had never seen anything like that before from his brother. Man, bro, what the hell's gotten into you? The two ran to school rather than get the bus. Jeff looked behind and he could see people on the street attending to the wounded kids. Did he feel remorse that day as he sat in his class, listening to a teacher talk about verb conjugation? No, he felt the opposite. He felt alive. He felt the violence in his very marrow. He loved violence. This was a new discovery for him. Part 2, Jeff the Maniac. Jeff got home that evening and his mom asked him how school was, to which Jeff replied, awesome, as the sweet memory of the beating and the smell of someone else's blood filled his senses. But as things tend to go, Jeff wasn't exactly off the hook for executing what the justice system calls a serious assault, not to mention using a deadly weapon on a child. The cops turned up at Jeff's house and explained that their son's outstanding wrath had caused some serious injuries to 3 kids that lived in the neighborhood. Jeff, as stubborn as ever, explained to the cops and his distraught parents that he'd been the victim of the violence, and he had only retaliated in a comparable fashion. Comparable, said one of the cops. I got 2 kids in the hospital with stab wounds, and another kid that looks like he's been kicked in the stomach by a racehorse. Jeff had to try really hard not to smile. He bit his lip. What could he do, though? The game was up. There were witnesses. There was forensic evidence. Okay, Jeff said, it was me, but I was only sticking up for my bro. Those guys pulled out the knife first. I just finished it. Jeff was already thinking about spending a year in what he heard was nicknamed Gladiator School when his brother Lou came rushing down the stairs. With the knife in his hands, Lou said, it was me. Don't arrest my brother. Lou put down the knife and the cops cuffed him. All the while, Jeff was telling him that Lou was lying, that it was he who was at fault for the bus stop carnage. As his brother was taken away in the cop car, Jeff sat in the driveway weeping. What had he done? For days, Jeff stayed in his bed with the curtains closed. He couldn't go to school. He couldn't even sleep. He just lay in bed, depressed, feeling as if darkness had chosen him, abused him, manipulated him. After a few days, something unbelievable happened. His mom waltzed into his bedroom as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just lost a son to a brutal penal system, possibly for many years. She just whipped back the curtains and jovially exclaimed to Jeff, guess what day it is? What the? Thought Jeff. Has this woman lost her mind? It's party day, said his mom. You remember, before all that nonsense with the knives, we were invited to Billy's birthday bash. Jeff was rather displeased with his mom's patent lack of empathy. Come on, Jeff, she said. So your brother's gone for a while. Don't let that spoil an otherwise beautiful sunny day. You'll always be my beautiful son. Let's go have some fun. For some reason, Jeff didn't like being called beautiful. He noticed she'd really gone overboard with her clothes. She was dressed to impress, and this bugged him even more. When the family arrived at Barbara's house, Jeff noticed that all the adults were wearing fancy clothes. All of them. It seemed they were trying to impress each other. Some of them were noticeably drunk already, talking loudly about their many accomplishments and the wonderful, talented children they'd brought into the world. Go on in the yard and play with the other kids, Jeff's mom said. This would prove to be foolhardy, given Jeff's track record so far with kids in the neighborhood. And then it happened. Just as Jeff was starting to get along with the children, Randy, Keith, and Troy appeared. Still looking a bit beaten up, but no doubt ready for another round with the new kid. Randy said, you didn't think this was done, did you? It ain't done by a long way. Again, Jeff was reminded of countless teenage movies he'd seen. What ensued was a one-on-one with Randy and Jeff. Jeff headbutted Randy, breaking his recently fixed nose yet another time, and blood splattered on the faces of the younger kids, sending them running around the garden in hysterics. The small kid froze, and as a teddy bear dropped from his hands, you could see a wet patch form and expand on the front of his SpongeBob shorts. Jeff got the better of Randy, but then the 2 goons pulled out their guns. This was unheard of in the neighborhood, and even some of the parents were now running into the distance shouting, someone call 911. Jeff couldn't do anything with guns pointed at him, and before he knew it, Randy stabbed him with a knife. Troy and Keith laughed like the goons they were, and then Randy just started beating Jeff to a pulp. He dragged Jeff into the kitchen, whereupon he picked up a bottle of vodka and smashed it on Jeff's head. But Jeff didn't fight back. He took every punch, every kick. His face was dripping blood. A shard of glass was sticking out of his head. His stomach was punctured, but he didn't fight back. Come on, said Randy. Hit me. Fight back. Jeff just took more shots to the face, but he didn't retaliate. To try and light the fire again in Jeff, Randy shouted, your bro's some dude's girl right now, and that's all because of me. Fight me. Part 3. Jeff snaps. And that was it. That was the final straw. Jeff felt that rage build up inside him again. He lurched at Randy like a rabid lion. He pushed him down and smothered him with his incredible strength. Randy was helpless. Jeff drew back his fist and punched Randy right in the heart. A shocked look appeared on Randy's face, like he'd just seen the devil himself. He took one last breath, blood bubbled from his mouth, and he died there and then. The parents there still couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. There were children that had become feral, animalistic, bestial. Keith and Troy now turned their guns on Jeff. They fired and missed. Jeff ran up the stairs past the parents, now in a state of shock, their faces whiter than the new ceramic tiles on the kitchen floor. Now out of bullets, Troy and Keith pulled knives out on Jeff, but soon Jeff had his own weapon, a towel rack. He cracked Troy's balloon-sized head with the rack, knocking him clean out. Skinny Keith realized he was probably now out of his depth, but it was too late. There was nowhere to run. They were both in the bathroom fighting, and suddenly they hit a shelf and a bottle of bleach fell on them. Inexplicably, the bleach was open and the boys were both covered in the stuff. Keith screamed as the bleach burned his face, and that's when Jeff caved Keith's wiry face in with his handy towel rack. As Keith lay on the floor, not far from death, he smiled. Funny, huh? Said Jeff, somewhat nonplussed, even though he was no stranger to strangeness. Look at you, mumbled Keith through bloody, broken teeth. You've been doused in bleach and vodka. Keith's last effort to beat that new kid was to throw a cigarette lighter at Jeff. Jeff burst into flames, and screaming, he ran downstairs and through the house. He was a ball of flames, a human inferno. Parents stood back in horror. Jeff collapsed, and that's the last thing he remembered about that day. Part 4. Jeff the Killer. The next thing Jeff knew, he was lying in a hospital bed and he couldn't move. Almost his entire body was covered with bandages. Suddenly he heard, he's awake. It was that familiar voice of his overbearing mother, but this time he was pleased she was by his side. Jeff, she said, Lou is out. Witnesses told the police that Randy had first produced the knife. Your brother's free. We're going home, a family again. Jeff felt a twinge of relief, but it was hard to be happy when his body was covered in 3rd, 2nd, and 1st-degree burns. He tried to smile, and then he realized that he had no lips to smile with. His mother saw her son's pain. Good news, though, Jeff. Every cloud has a silver... She didn't finish her sentence, this time being self-aware enough not to be chirpy in a horrible situation. Sometime later, both Jeff's parents were there when his final bandage had to be pulled off. "This is gonna hurt a bit," the doctor told Jeff, as those final bandages unfurled from Jeff's face. He was taken aback by the sheer horror painted on his parents' faces. They were trying to suppress their disgust, but something hardwired into their brains wouldn't allow them to hide their terror. Jeff asked for a mirror. The doctor told him, "Just start with one part of your face and then move to another part. This might come as a shock to you, but you'll soon get used to it." Jeff didn't take that advice and instead just grabbed the mirror. For seconds, minutes, he stared at that mirror, moving his head from side to side, studying every angle. His parents were waiting for him to cry, to scream, to collapse in shock, but as Jeff kept looking at his new face, a white, leathery face, a face without eyelids, without anything resembling normal lips, it just looked as though he was happy with the result of his personal tragedy. "It's perfect," he said, "just perfect." He wasn't crying. His mother noticed he was trying to laugh. When Jeff was left alone, the doctor told his parents that their son was in shock, and it wasn't unusual for someone to act that way. The reality, he said, hadn't just set in. "Just take him home," the doctor said, "and give him a lot of support." "Of course we will," said Jeff's mother, feeling ever so slightly guilty that she was glad about the fact that Jeff would be easier to control now that he was damaged goods. "Oh," said the doctor as he was walking away, "don't let him be alone for long." Later that night, while the family was sleeping, Jeff's mom was awoken by a strange sound coming from the bathroom. When she entered that bathroom, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Jeff was carving a smile into his face with a knife. He'd also cut off what remained of his eyelids. "How do I look, Ma?" Jeff said earnestly. She couldn't even speak. She couldn't move. The woman was petrified. "What's up, Ma? Don't you think I'm beautiful anymore?" "Yeah," she said, while slowly backpedaling out of the bathroom. "You are my beautiful son. You'll always be my beautiful little honey pot." She then ran for it, got Jeff's dad, and the two of them tried to wrestle the knife from Jeff's hand. "What?" Jeff screamed. "You lied to me. You don't think I'm beautiful." It was too powerful for them. The rage had returned, and it wasn't difficult to stick that knife into both of them. Jeff stood over them, their lungs drowning in their own blood. It was a beautiful sight. He was Jeff the killer. That's what he'd always been, a killer. He had one last stop before he left the house and fulfilled his own prophecy. Jeff walked into Lou's room. Standing at the side of Lou's bed, he put his scarred, leathery hand over his brother's mouth. Lou suddenly looked at Jeff with wide-open eyes as his dear brother sunk a knife deep into his stomach. "Shh," said Jeff. "Just go to sleep." Part 5. Jeff the Thriller. We weren't kidding at the start when we said that in the US, scores of young people are abducted by strangers. But did Jeff the Killer ever actually exist? We think most of you already know that this is fiction, but what really gives it away? If you go back from the start of the original Jeff the Killer story, there's always a part that says, "Excerpt from a local newspaper, ominous unknown killer is still at large." After weeks of unexplained murders, the ominous unknown killer is still on the rise. After little evidence has been found, a young boy states that he survived one of the killer's attacks and bravely tells his story. Okay, so first of all, the headline of that story, "Ominous unknown killer is still at large," would never be a headline in any newspaper anywhere. Trust us. We have former journalists and editors on our team of writers. The writer of Jeff the Killer seems to have found that adjective ominous and then gone and used it wherever he can. Secondly, the first paragraph is badly written. Listen to this. "There, in the little ray of light illuminating from between my curtains, were a pair of two eyes. These weren't regular eyes, they were dark, ominous eyes." Ominous again. But the grammar also isn't corrected in the first sentence. As for a pair of two eyes, that's called a tautology, and no news editor on earth would allow that to go to print. So we know at the very beginning that this tale is not true. If the point was to make it sound believable, the Jeff the Killer writer messed up right at the start. As for a young boy attacking other young boys and going on a murder spree, well, there just haven't been any murder sprees of this kind since the story was first published in 2011. So what about Jeff's amazing heart-stopping strength? Well, let's just take a giant leap and say Jeff was possessed and had superhuman strength for a 13-year-old kid. So there is something called commotio cordis, which can happen to a person when they're struck in the heart region of their chest at just the right time. And yes, it can kill. You can actually find quite a few stories when this has happened to young people, although baseballs were the killer, not punches. What about Jeff going up in flames after having a vodka bottle smashed over him and being doused with bleach? Firstly, not much vodka would have gotten on Jeff. Secondly, you couldn't set a person on fire if you splashed vodka on them. It's not flammable enough. Remember that Keith somehow threw the lighter? We're guessing it was a Zippo lighter with a wick. But even then, vodka? No way. As for the bleach, which made Keith and Jeff scream, well, bleach can irritate the skin if it's not washed off. But it wouldn't make a person scream unless, possibly, it was poured into their eyes. And another thing, bleach isn't flammable. It's just not believable at all. Jeff would now be 22 years old and still on the run after killing all those kids he didn't kill. He wouldn't be hard to spot, given that he has horrific scars from burn.
One day when I was a junior in high school, the bell had just rung, and I was on my way to art class. It was on the furthest end of the school, so I was walking pretty quickly to get there in time. All of a sudden, an announcement came on the intercom. It was the secretary from the front desk of the school. Her voice was shaky as she announced that the school had just been placed on lockdown, and everyone needed to get inside the room closest to them and follow lockdown procedures. Before hanging up, she said that this was not a drill. There was silence for a moment before total chaos erupted in the hallways. Everyone was running around and there were papers and books being scattered about. I was nearly to the art room at this point, so I ended up just sprinting there. When I got there, the room was bustling with people running in all different directions. After letting a few more people into the room, the teacher decided to close the door and lock it. We turned off the lights and then all gathered in the back of the classroom where we wouldn't be visible from the window in the door. It was almost completely silent in the room despite there being at least 30 people in there. I was doing my best not to expect the worst. Maybe this was just a false alarm. The teacher got a notification on her phone and we watched as her eyes grew wide as she read it. In a hushed voice, she informed us that there had been a murder in a neighborhood down the road from the school, and the police had reason to think the suspect was hiding somewhere nearby, possibly in the school. I couldn't believe what was happening. This seemed like something from a horror movie. One of the younger girls in the class was so scared that she was crying and shaking, and a few other kids were trying to comfort her. Because I was sitting closest to the supply closet, the teacher asked me to go in the closet and grab a blanket. The supply closet was a very spacious walk-in closet with rows of shelves on either side. I scanned the shelves looking for a blanket when all of a sudden I noticed something strange. In the back corner of the closet were long pieces of fabric hanging up that were used for sewing projects. Behind the fabric, I saw a pair of dirty shoes. Someone was hiding back there. I wondered why they weren't with the rest of the class when all of a sudden it hit me. Was that the murder suspect? My heart was beating like crazy. I knew the best thing I could do was pretend I didn't know the person was there. Trying to appear as calm as possible, I grabbed the blanket before turning off the lights in the closet and shutting the door. I handed the blanket to the girl before going up to the teacher and whispering to her what I had seen. I knew if the other students found out what I had seen, there would be a panic and that would not end well. I could see the fear in the teacher's eyes, but she said nothing, just picked up her phone and sent a message to the front desk. 10 minutes of silence went by before the teacher got another notification. She then stood up and told us that she had been told that we needed to walk calmly out of the classroom and go to the middle school across the street until the school was cleared. We did as we were told. Part of me was sure that the suspect was going to chase after us, but the closet door remained shut. Once we were out of the school, we began running at a full-on sprint until we reached the middle school. We stayed there for hours until our parents were eventually able to come pick us up. On the news that night, we found out that the SWAT team came to the school and was able to capture the suspect without anyone getting hurt. A shiver goes down my spine anytime I go into the closet, even now. One day I was walking to math class and one of my friends stopped me to ask if I was ready for the test we had that day. I told her I was confused because I thought the test wasn't until next week. She insisted that it was today, and she said she had been up all night studying for it. My heart sank. The test was a huge part of my grade and I wasn't prepared for it at all. I was so panicked that I told my friend to tell the teacher I was sick and I was going to hide in the bathroom. She told me she would. I quickly ducked into the nearest bathroom and went into the last stall, preparing to spend the next hour on my phone. I was hanging my backpack up on the hook on the stall door when all of a sudden an announcement came through on the intercom. It was the school principal. He said that the school was now under lockdown and that this was an emergency. Everyone was to get to the nearest classroom and follow lockdown procedures. At first, I assumed this was a drill until all the lights went out, leaving me in pitch darkness. This had never happened in any of our drills before. Was there actually a real emergency? I frantically texted my friend from math class and asked her if she knew what was going on. She texted me back right away and said that a male student had been seen threatening another male student over a knife. It was supposedly an argument over a girl, but the rumor was that the guy was completely deranged and there was no telling who he might hurt. I had little to no protection, so I was terrified. I climbed up on the toilet seat so no one would be able to see my feet, and I tried to stay as quiet as possible. Several minutes went by before I heard footsteps enter the bathroom. It was someone crying, but I couldn't figure out if it was a boy or a girl. They entered the stall next to me and closed the door. I heard something metal fall on the floor, and I looked down to see the point of a long silver knife. I don't know what went through my mind at that moment, but my sheer panic caused me to make a run for it. I unlocked the stall door and started sprinting through the hallways. I kept running until I got out of the school, my arms in the air as I came face to face with an army of police officers. After they patted me down, I explained exactly where the suspect was. Luckily, they were able to catch the guy without anyone getting hurt. It turned out that the guy didn't end up stabbing anyone, he just threatened him. He did, of course, still get into plenty of legal trouble, and he hasn't been back at school since. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was sitting next to my best friend Kayla in geometry. The teacher had finished the rest of the lesson and was giving us the rest of class time to get a head start on homework. Kayla was trying to explain to me a problem I didn't understand when all of a sudden we were interrupted by the intercom. There was an announcement that we were under an active lockdown and everyone needed to shelter in place immediately. We asked the teacher if she had been warned that we were going to have a drill, and she told us no. The teachers were always warned about lockdown drills, so this was when we realized this could actually be a serious thing. The teacher locked the door and turned off the lights. Then we began working together to push our heavy metal desks up against the door so that no one could get in. We then hid in a corner of the room. I was tucked underneath the teacher's desk along with a few other students. We were all quiet, checking our phones to see if we could figure out what was going on. I was looking through the news app when I saw that there was a crazy man believed to be on drugs that was involved in an assault right by our school. It was believed that he may have entered our school and was still on the loose. I shared this information with the class, and we were all even more terrified. A few girls started to cry, and some people were texting their parents to let them know what was going on. I had a sister who was a freshman, who was also in the building, and I texted her to see if she was okay and asked if she knew what was going on. 15 painful minutes went by before she texted me back. She said someone had been banging on her classroom door and screaming profanities for the last 10 minutes, but they had finally gone away. I decided to keep this information to myself, not wanting to freak my classmates out even more. But before long, I heard yelling in the distance and held my breath, hoping that whoever it was would just pass by the classroom. But before long, there was a sudden banging at the door, followed by a crazed laughter. The man began taunting us, telling us that he had a gun, and there was no point in hiding because he was going to get us. We were horrified, but did our best to stay quiet. Our teacher was on the phone with 911, giving them a whispered update of what was happening. Suddenly, there was a loud gunshot from the hallway, causing several of us to cry out loudly. The man outside laughed even harder. There were shouts from further down the hallway, and I understood to be police officers. They demanded the man drop his weapon. After several requests, they tased him, and I heard him screaming like crazy. Around 30 more minutes went by before we were finally told that the school had been cleared. The man had been taken into custody, and we were free to go. When I was in high school, we had a teacher named Mr. Dickinson who taught both history and government. Typically, you would take history your junior year and government your senior year, so you would have him 2 years in a row. When I first met him in my junior year, I thought he was the nicest person. He seemed to really be passionate about teaching, and he had a lot of patience, even with the kids who were a little bit slower to learn. He let kids retake tests if they did really badly, and even got to school really early in the morning to tutor kids that were having a hard time. He was actually one of my favorite teachers, and seemed to genuinely like me. Towards the end of our junior year, Mr. Dickens' wife had a little baby boy named Matthew, and he was happier than ever. He had a photograph of his son that he would keep on his desk at all times. He would always show us pictures of him and would talk to us about the baby's first time crawling or standing up. It was clear that he was a very proud dad. But during the beginning of my senior year of high school, Mr. Dickens' whole life came crashing down around him. We lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone and rumors traveled fast. It didn't take us students very long to find out what happened, and it shocked us all completely. Carol, Mr. Dickens' wife, had been cheating on him with one of their neighbors. It had been going on for years, since even before the two of them got married. As it turned out, Matthew really wasn't Mr. Dickens' son after all. After all of this happened, Mr. Dickens went completely crazy. He ended up going through their house and breaking anything he could get his hands on. He smashed their furniture and broke some paintings that had been in Carol's family for generations. The police ended up having to come and calm him down. Carol filed for divorce, and Mr. Dickens had to move into an apartment. He wasn't allowed at school for a while, and we had a substitute teacher for nearly a month. The rumor was that he was in a mental asylum, but I have no idea if that was really true. Then, on one random Monday, Mr. Dickinson came back to school. The picture of baby Matthew had been taken off his desk, but that was probably the smallest thing that had changed. Mr. Dickinson had become a completely different person. He had cut off his long, hippie-like hair and shaved his face. Instead of his nerdy graphic t-shirts he always used to wear, he wore a long button-down shirt and slacks. His laid-back smile was gone, and he had a harsh, mean attitude. He yelled at us for little things, like needing to borrow a pencil in class. Strangely, he was the meanest to the girls. I worried if his wife cheating on him had made him hate all females. I felt like I couldn't even make eye contact with him without him screaming at me. I did my best to blend in with the rest of the class and go unnoticed. It was sad how much he had changed. It was as if his old self had died and been replaced with this other person. One day it was close to finals time, and we all had to do a final project for government that we would later present to the class. We were all hard at work on our projects while Mr. Dickinson sat at his desk grading papers. He was in a particularly bad mood that day, so we were being careful to be extra quiet while working on our laptops. We were only a few minutes into class when the lights went out completely. It was a stormy day outside, so very little light came in from the windows and the room was dark. After a few minutes, the principal got on the intercom and announced that there was an electrical problem going on and we were out of power completely. They didn't know how long it was going to take to fix it. We were all supposed to go on about our business as best we could in the meantime. Of course, in our class we were using laptops, and without the internet, we couldn't get any work done. This completely enraged Mr. Dickinson to the point where he began screaming at us as if it was our fault. He threw a chalkboard eraser across the room and nearly hit a kid. We were all just staring at him in silence as he screamed, too afraid to move a muscle. It was clear to me that he had lost his mind. We needed to get help right away. Mr. Dickinson was swearing at us, and his face was completely red. His eyes looked crazed. I don't know what came over me, but I felt the need to speak up. Mr. Dickinson, please, don't you think you should calm down? He walked over to me, glaring at me with a look of complete hate. Before I could even react, he slapped me right across the face. I burst into tears immediately, and several kids jumped out of their seats. The biggest guy in the class, a football player named Mark, put himself between me and Mr. Dickinson. They were starting to stare each other down. Mia, go next door to Mrs. Riley's class and tell her that Mr. Dickinson has lost it and we need police in here, Mark said calmly to the girl sitting next to me. Mia jumped up to do this, but before she could, Mr. Dickinson ran to the door. His mood suddenly changed. It was like he realized what he had done and now was scared about what was going to happen to him. He grabbed a trash can that was filled with paper and set it down in the entrance of our classroom. He then took a lighter from his pocket and lit the paper on fire. Before I could even process what he was doing, he dumped the trash can over, causing the burning papers to fall onto the carpet. He then walked out of the classroom and locked the door behind him, trapping us inside. Complete chaos broke out in our classroom. The fire was spreading quickly because of how much carpeting was in the room, and there were several people trying to put it out at once. "Someone called 911!" screamed Mia. But we weren't allowed to have our cell phones on us during the school day. They had to stay in our lockers. "What about the landline?" someone asked, gesturing towards the cord phone sitting on Mr. Dickinson's desk. "The power's out, remember?" "I'm not dying in here," Mark said. He jumped over the flames and began shoving his body into the door over and over, trying to break it down. A couple of his football friends joined him, but our walls had recently been reinforced as a safety precaution in case that we had an active shooter somewhere in the building. I would have never thought that our biggest threat would have been right inside the classroom. We were screaming for help, and we could see through the glass in the door that a few kids were gathered outside. They were trying to open the door for us, but of course they didn't have a key. "Go get a teacher!" Mark screamed at them. By this point, the entire room had filled up with smoke, and it was hard to even see where we were going. We were all coughing, and it was getting harder and harder to breathe. I knew we were running out of time. The flames were getting out of control at this point, and I had pressed my body against the wall to try to get away from them. Mark was still working on getting the door down, but wasn't making any progress. He was getting tired and running out of breath. "We need to break a window," I screamed. Everyone seemed to agree with me, and we began throwing anything we could find into the window trying to break it. It was a lot stranger than it looked, and nothing was working. Finally, Mike told us all to stand back. This was a hard thing to do without literally stepping into the fire. I screamed as the flames touched my ankles and arms. I couldn't get away from the fire anymore. Mike took a heavy metal desk, picked it up over his head, and threw it into the window. The glass shattered instantly. Now we had another problem. We were on the second story of the building. If we jumped out of the window, we would definitely hurt ourselves, but at least now we had some fresh air. All 15 of us were packed around the window, doing our best to keep breathing. "What can we use as a rope?" someone asked. They had to practically yell to be heard through the cackling of the flames. We ended up using the only thing we had, our clothes. We began tying hoodies and coats together, but it still wasn't long enough. The guys started taking off their shirts and adding them to the makeshift rope. Not having enough oxygen was beginning to affect me, and I felt like I could pass out at any moment. I sank to my knees, not able to hold myself up anymore. "I'm going to die," I thought to myself. And what a terrible way to go. Locked up in a fire that my deranged teacher set in order to kill us. The guys were tying girls to the rope and slowly letting them out through the window. It didn't stretch all the way to the ground, but they were able to jump the extra couple of feet. The plan was to get all the girls out first, and then the guys were going to go. Where was the fire department? Hadn't someone from the school office called for help yet? My thoughts were getting jumbled, and it was harder and harder to stay awake. I felt like I was in a bad dream, and things were moving very slowly around me. I could feel someone with strong arms picking me up off the ground and placing me down close to the window. Through the smoke, I could see several guys working on tying the rope around me. They were all coughing like crazy. The next thing I knew, I was being slowly lowered to the ground. The cold air felt so good against my skin after spending so much time so close to the fire. I didn't know how the rope was staying together. I was sure some of the clothing had to have torn by now. I was shocked when my feet touched the ground. Mia and a couple of the other girls were untying the rope from around me so it could be lowered back up again. I finally heard sirens in the distance and knew that the fire department was on its way. Kids were everywhere, running and trying to get as far away from the building as possible. There was a fire truck after fire truck and a ton of ambulances. Mia was screaming out to get someone's attention and help me. Finally, some paramedics with a stretcher made their way over to me and began helping me. They put an oxygen mask over my face, and I slowly began to breathe a little bit better. They put me onto the stretcher and loaded me into the ambulance. I couldn't talk because the mask was over my face, but I could hear everything that was going on. "Did they catch him?" I heard one of the paramedics ask. "No, he's completely missing," someone said. My heart sank as I realized that Mr. Dickinson might actually get away with what he did. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, and my parents were on either side of me. I looked out the window and saw that it was already dark outside. A lot of time must have passed. I looked down at my arms and legs and saw that there were bandages on them. I realized that I must have had burns underneath them. I turned to my parents and asked them what had happened after I passed out. They said that other than needing oxygen and getting the burns, I was going to be okay. My throat was sore, and I knew it was from breathing in so much smoke. I then asked my parents what happened to Mr. Dickinson. They told me that after setting the classroom on fire and leaving us all for dead, Mr. Dickinson had driven home, gotten a gun, and shot it in his head. He was dead. I was shocked, but also relieved that he wasn't going to hurt any of us anymore. I then thought of the rest of my classmates, all the guys who had put my life before theirs and helped me get out the window when I couldn't. Did they all make it out? My parents looked at each other and I could tell something was wrong. My mom took my hand in hers and told me that sadly, there was one person that didn't get out in time. They had passed away before the fire department was able to get to them. "Who was it?" I asked, my heart pounding. It was Mark, her voice so quiet that I almost didn't hear her. He helped everyone out of the window, but there was nobody left to help lower him down. I started crying immediately. I was crushed and felt more guilty than I ever have in my entire life. Mark had died saving all of our lives. I was only alive today because of him. He had sacrificed his own life for his classmates. For months after, I felt like there was a giant hole in my chest. I felt guilty for enjoying anything, even as simple as music, because I knew that Mark now couldn't. Years have gone by, but I still wake up screaming in the night when I remember the smoke filling the room and the flames burning my skin. The flashbacks are terrible, but at least I'm alive.
Well-known asshole, Jeff the Killer. We've also suggestion from a goat-like looking man telling me how I should react to a particular app that a lot of people use. And that's lip syncing to a lot of songs, merely portraying against other killers, such as the well-known asshole Jeff the Killer. We've also got Laughing Jack, Takey Toby, been drowned too. Even the tall, dark, and most handsome Slender Man, even though he has no mouth. May I ask why? Plus, am I the only one who's realized how depressing these guys are? Ugh. Except for Slender Man, cause, well, it's quite obvious. It sounds like hell in my opinion. So let's take on this suggestion and react to a bunch of musically entertaining garbage. See what I did there? Excuse the pun. I'm quite proud of it. Who knows? Maybe it'll inspire me to join in on the fun too. Anyway, let's see what this is all about then. If I'm going to be looking for these musically compilations, I might as well type them in. Right. Let's try musically creepypasta. There's quite a lot of them here. There's a lot of compilations. What? Even Undertale? That's crazy. So far, I've been seeing a lot of Laughing Jack and Jeff the Killer and Been Drowned images within these thumbnails. But, well, I'm gonna have to choose one, so I think I'll go back to the top and go for maybe this one. Is that Tiki Toby? Oh god, no. My arch nemesis! Ugh. Wait, get it, Jeff. You vape. But you're not exactly lip syncing, are you? You just. Is that Tiki Toby? Oh god, no. My arch nemesis! Ugh. Wait, get it, Jeff. You vape. But you're not exactly lip syncing, are you? You just. Whatever. Okay. Is Jeff maybe? Okay, I have no words. I'm literally speechless. Clearly. Creepy. Hey, look, it's me! How dare you! Okay. I dig this song so bad! Is it me? Is this a compilation between these particular people? Am I gonna have to turn my head? Oh, okay, okay. Right. A compilation between two characters is probably the best ones I've seen so far. That song kind of fits him, to be honest. It fits Jeff the Killer perfectly. Man, he's a creeper. Of course, Jeff the Killer. Theme song. Ugh. I really don't want to do this, but I'm going to have to, considering how you guys might feel. I'm pretty sure you'll feel disappointed if I didn't do it. So let's do this. I'll be sure to let you know how it goes, so I'll see you in a moment. Enjoy this crap. fun. I can't believe I just did that. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this video. It was certainly very interesting, and I'll be sure to not do it ever again. As always, like, comment, and please subscribe to me, or else you won't wake up. You'll be sure to know when another video comes out, I promise you. Be sure to tell me what I should react to next, and then I may just do it. If you have any questions for my Q&A, please comment below. So I'll see you next time.
When I was younger,
Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm Ron Mackenzie Lafergie. Eyeless Jack is a spooky character originating from the scary stories of the internet known as creepypasta. He's known for sneaking into houses at night in hopes of cannibalizing unknowing victims. But what if this freaky fellow was not a creation of the internet, but actually a real thing? Let's explore. If you want more What If videos, check out our biggest What Ifs playlist on the channel. Now get ready, it's time to ask a question. What if Eyeless Jack was real? As is common with these creepypasta creatures, little is known of Eyeless Jack's appearance, which makes him kinda hard to research, but such is life. However, there are some consistencies between the stories. Eyeless Jack is generally described as a person in a black hoodie wearing a blue mask with no nose or mouth. As the name would entail, he seems to have no eyes, with large black sockets staring out from behind the mask. It's also said that dark liquid, presumably blood, can be seen dripping from his eyes. Technically, not even his gender is known, but since Jack is in the name, I'll assume he's male for the purposes of this video. With regards to his actions, Eyeless Jack, whom I must continuously remind myself not to call Jacksepticeye, is one murderous dude. Some stories tell of him sneaking into houses at night and attacking people, others tell of him stealthily stealing kidneys and eating them. The original story paints a pretty gruesome picture. A man named Mitch moves in with his brother Edwin and wakes up one night with a large gash on his cheek. He goes to the hospital only for the doctor to lift his shirt and say, "You somehow lost your left kidney last night. We don't know how though. Sorry, Mitch." Look, I didn't say it was a good story. Mitch goes back home, is confronted by Eyeless Jack, snaps a quick picture, and flees. Later he learns that his brother was murdered by the creature and finds a piece of his partially eaten kidney near the body. Yikes, sounds scary. And unrealistic, but hey, that's creepypasta for you. Let's look past the awkward dialogue and imagine what would happen if this bad boy really existed. The murderous aspect of Eyeless Jack isn't particularly new to this world. Serial killers really do exist in the real world, and while Eyeless Jack might be somewhat more effective and enigmatic than other killers, the end result would be more or less the same. If word got out that he was going around killing people, many people would become rather paranoid about it. His unsettling appearance would certainly increase fear of him, although for most people, the fact that he kills and eats people would probably be enough to instill fear. Furthermore, the fact that he wears a mask would make it difficult for police to catch him, since even survivors wouldn't be able to identify him, and his ability to avoid capture would prove useful. Of course, a huge factor would be whether or not Eyeless Jack was a human or some sort of monster. If human, it's possible that he would eventually be apprehended by the police, or even get overpowered and killed by one potential victim. Some stories tell of him getting into a violent scuffle with certain victims, meaning if he was human and made a mistake, he could be killed at any point. However, if Eyeless Jack was some sort of mystical creature with magic abilities, he would be difficult to stop. It's unclear based on the stories whether or not the creature can be harmed, but it probably could be. The problem is, the way it sneaks into houses and somehow extracts kidneys without people feeling it does seem to point to some sort of magical or demonic abilities. The cannibalism would also indicate that he wasn't human, although he certainly wouldn't be the first cannibal serial killer we've ever seen. In this case, it's possible that Eyeless Jack would never be caught and would simply become a real-life boogeyman. At the end of the day, however, even this would not change the world too much. Even if his powers truly were mystical, there's a good chance that the mainstream narrative would hold that he was simply a highly skilled person who was managing to avoid capture. The only people who would know the truth would be the victims, and as we know, they tend not to live all that long. And those who survive would have a good deal of trouble convincing others that a demon had attacked them. It would be scary to know that you might just wake up without a kidney, but then that sounds quite a bit better than waking up dead. While it would be rather terrifying to run into Eyeless Jack, the addition of a single serial killer wouldn't affect the world all that much. Thank you for watching Life's Biggest Questions. I hope this was interesting. Eyeless Jack is a spooky character originating from the scary stories of the internet known as creepypasta. He's known for sneaking into houses at night in hopes of cannibalizing unknowing victims. But what if this freaky fella was not a creation of the internet, but actually a real thing? Let's explore. If you want more what if videos, check out our biggest what ifs playlist on the channel. Now get ready, it's time to ask the question, what if Eyeless Jack was real? As is common with these creepypasta creatures, little is known of Eyeless Jack's appearance, which makes him kinda hard to research, but such is life. However, there are some consistencies between the stories. Eyeless Jack is generally described as a person in a black hoodie wearing a blue mask with no nose or mouth. As the name would entail, he seems to have no eyes, with large black sockets staring out from behind the mask. It's also said that dark liquid, presumably blood, can be seen dripping from his eyes. Technically, not even his gender is known, but since Jack is in the name, I'll assume he's male for the purposes of this video. With regards to his actions, Eyeless Jack, whom I must continuously remind myself not to call Jacksepticeye, is one murderous dude. Some stories tell of him sneaking into houses at night and attacking people, others tell of him stealthily stealing kidneys and eating them. The original story paints a pretty gruesome picture. A man named Mitch moves in with his brother Edwin and wakes up one night with a large gash on his cheek. He goes to the hospital only for the doctor to lift his shirt and say, "You somehow lost your left kidney last night. We don't know how though. Sorry, Mitch." Look, I didn't say it was a good story. Mitch goes back home, is confronted by Eyeless Jack, snaps a quick picture, and flees. Later, he learns that his brother was murdered by the creature and finds a piece of his partially eaten kidney near the body. Yikes, sounds scary and unrealistic, but hey, that's creepypasta for you. Let's look past the awkward dialogue and imagine what would happen if this bad boy really existed. The murderous aspect of Eyeless Jack isn't particularly new to this world. Serial killers really do exist in the real world, and while Eyeless Jack might be somewhat more effective and enigmatic than other killers, the end result would be more or less the same. If word got out that he was going around killing people, many people would become rather paranoid about him. His unsettling appearance would certainly increase fear of him, although for most people, the fact that he kills and eats people would probably be enough to instill fear. Furthermore, the fact that he wears a mask would make it difficult for police to catch him, since even survivors wouldn't be able to identify him, and his ability to avoid capture would prove useful. Of course, a huge factor would be whether or not Eyeless Jack was a human or some sort of monster. If human, it's possible that he would eventually be apprehended by the police, or even get overpowered and killed by one potential victim. Some stories tell of him getting into a violent scuffle with certain victims, meaning if he was human and made a mistake, he could be killed at any point. However, if Eyeless Jack was some sort of mystical creature with magic abilities, he would be difficult to stop. It's unclear based on the stories whether or not the creature can be harmed, but it probably could be. The problem is, the way it sneaks into houses and somehow extracts kidneys without people feeling it does seem to point to some sort of magical or demonic abilities. The cannibalism would also indicate that he wasn't human, although he certainly wouldn't be the first cannibal serial killer we've ever seen. In this case, it's possible that Eyeless Jack would never be caught and would simply become a real-life boogeyman. At the end of the day, however, even this would not change the world too much. Even if his powers truly were mystical, there's a good chance that the mainstream narrative would hold that he was simply a highly skilled person who was managing to avoid capture. The only people who would know the truth would be the victims, and as we know, they tend not to live all that long. And those who survive would have a good deal of trouble convincing others that a demon had attacked them. It would be scary to know that you might just wake up without a kidney, but then that sounds quite a bit better than waking up dead. While it would be rather terrifying to run into Eyeless Jack, the addition of a single serial killer wouldn't affect the world all that much. Thank you for watching Life's Biggest Questions. I hope this was interesting and informative, and maybe even inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you like this video, please thumbs up and subscribe.